beginning of all this, there's an infrastructure. So you have your state budget that's not really dealing with it, but you also have your federal budget that could be and is not. So those are your federal legislators. And I guess what I wanted to ask you about was this proxy war that the US is fighting against Russia via Ukraine. You've seen the rhetoric, you're part of the Green Party. So, Jill Stein's been labeled a Russian asset. The Green Party stance is anti-war and that we shouldn't be sending weapons to Ukraine. There should be diplomacy. Minsk II Accord should have been abided by. Ukraine should be neutral. NATO should stop pushing up on, the borders. And in fact, NATO should be abolished altogether. But what? We're feeling it as working folks in the United States. In your district, are people starting to have these conversations like, wait a second, another $50 billion to Ukraine? Hold up, or what are you hearing?
Yeah, no, that is actually a very common discussion for regular working class people. They're like, wait, I can't afford, they, especially with Abbott, they're like, oh, in the summer months, you're going to have to, make sure your thermostat's not too low, yada, 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 save electricity. And people are like, wait a minute, how come we have all these businesses open all night? Like the lights are on, nobody's there, you know what I mean? Stuff like that. People are talking about the war in Ukraine and they're talking about, how much is going over there, and also asking questions like, why are we over there? What does NATO actually do? And, that is helpful to hear, because I think people are asking the right questions, and it means that they're starting to at least think critically, which is super important for any anti-war efforts. I think a lot of people are frustrated because they see inflation, they see how expensive things are, and they're like, how come we're sending billions elsewhere? How come we have people sleeping on the streets? How come our kids don't have free lunches? Things like that. So obviously I speak to a lot of parents. Those are their concerns.
Are any of the governors in the US, are you hearing of any of them pushing back on the spending? Because of course this directly affects their state budgets. Their state budgets get smaller. Governors are receive federal funding for different categories. One of them, of course, being disaster relief, which your area needed from FEMA and whatnot and other things. But what are you hearing any pushback from the governor's office about Ukraine, or any of the governors that, you're kind of, because you're running in that race and those state races?
No, I feel like I'm the only one saying these things and advocating for peace talks and advocating to, abolish NATO. I don't think anybody else is trying to have those conversations. I think they're still focusing on fear mongering, and the duopoly is just pushing that rhetoric that, it's either pick lesser evil. They're both crises that you're going to be exposed to. They're not talking about climate change. They're not talking about inequality, anything like that. So, and if they've talked about it, I just haven't missed it. But every time they're in the news, it's just like, oh, they raised so many millions of dollars, and this person pulled a stunt on this person. It's really feels very immature. I'll be honest.
Well, and that's translating into the lack of diplomacy, right? Because the emotional intelligence is not there. Well, we have weapons, nuclear weapons. And now we're going from this enemy that we've created of Russia, right? This proxy war we're fighting there. Now we're amping it up with China. In fact, Garland was just on the news today talking about the threat from China, and they're arresting people that had sort of some collusion with the Chinese government or whatever. But and that rhetoric is amping up about China. So are we really in a place to take on two major nuclear powers in the world? What is
we're not even in a place to house and clothe and feed people. So no, we're not. It's just so, no. And I think it's a bit hypocritical for us to be, considering ourselves on moral high ground in this country in the first place.